Well, hello. In this lesson, we're going to be looking at how to graph a line when it's in slope-intercept form. Now, we've been doing a lot with graphing, and so this is just going to continue. But let's look at, first, let's review slope-intercept form and what that looks like. So remember, slope-intercept form looks like this, y equals mx plus b. And if you don't already have that in your notes, you want to make sure you get that down because this is an important concept. And you want to remember the different parts of that. Now, we have that letter m. That letter m, remember, represents your slope, and it's the rise over the run. This is how we represent that as a fraction. And the b value, that is your y-intercept. And your y-intercept, remember, is a value where x is 0 and y is some number. So those are parts of slope-intercept form. Now there are some steps that we're going to follow to graph an equation when it's given to us in slope-intercept form. The first step is you always need a starting point, which makes sense. And so what we're going to do is we're going to use the y-intercept, that coordinate where x is 0 and y is some number, as our starting amount, or as our starting point. And then we're going to use the slope. The way that we're going to do that is we're going to use the slope to find other points on a line. Now we are graphing a straight line, and so technically we only need 2 points to make a line, but when you're graphing it, you want to make sure that your line is accurate. So it's really important to make more than just 2 points. And so I'll show you how to do that in just a minute. And remember, the way that we're going to use that slope is it's the rise over the run. So let's look at an example. So here we have y equals 2x minus 3. So again, on your notes, if you're not using graph paper, you want to create your grid. And we're going to have a starting point. And so that starting point, again, is going to be our y-intercept. In this situation, our y-intercept is a coordinate. It's a coordinate 0, negative 3. It's that b value. If you look at your equation, y equals 2x minus 3. The minus 3, that is your y-intercept. So let's start by putting a point there at negative 3. Make sure you put the negative 3 on the y-axis, because this is the y-intercept. All right, now let's look at the slope. Now the slope is just a number 2. Now 2, technically we could write 2 as a fraction by putting it over 1. So anytime we have what's called an integer is a number that's not a fraction, we can always write it as a fraction by putting it over 1, because 2 divided by 1 we know is just 2. All right, so our rise is 2, our run is 1. Now the way that you can remember this is, right now if you're listening to this video and if you're sitting in your chair and if your mom asks you to get up and do something, or if you hear the phone ring, or if you're going to go answer the door, you're going to have to first get up out of your chair, you're going to have to rise up, and then run to wherever you're trying to get to. You wouldn't scoot your chair over and then get up. That would look kind of weird and it'd take you a while. So the way that we're going to do this is we're going to do the rise over the run. So starting at this point where y is negative 3, we're going to rise up 2 units, and then we're going to run across 1 unit. So that means we're going to go up 2 and over 1. And we can repeat that process as many times as we want. And if we want, we could even go backwards. Now if we go backwards, the way that's going to look is we're going to go down 2 and to the left 1. So we do the complete opposite if we're going to go backwards. So instead of going up 2 and to the right 1, we're going to go down 2 and then to the left 1. And now we can connect all these points at the line. We don't just leave them as random points. We want to connect them, and they should form a perfectly straight line if we've done it correctly. Let's look at another example. So this time we can see that we do have a fraction for our slope. But let's start with your y-intercept, because you always need to have a starting point. And your starting point is going to be that y-intercept, and that y-intercept is going to be at 1. So let's put a point there. So again, if you're doing this video, if you're watching this video, you want to make sure that you're following along by doing this in your note sheet. Don't just be sitting back watching the video. You need to practice this while I'm doing it. All right. So now we're going to do the slope. The slope is 3 halves, 3 over 2. So we're going to go up 3 and then over to the right 2. So up 3 over 2. Now if I try to do this again, it's not going to fit on this graph that I have on my screen. Now technically I could add some lines if I wanted to, but I want to go backwards now. So if I'm going to go backwards, I'm going to do the complete opposite. Instead of going up, I'm going to go down. Instead of going to the right, I'm going to go to the left. So down 3 to the left 2. I could now connect that with a line, or I could have continued and done a few extra points if I wanted to. But it's important to know how to do both directions. Okay, your graph should always look like a straight line. Let's look at another example. So this one we have negative 4/3 times x plus 2. So we're going to start with our y-intercept again. Our y-intercept is a coordinate 0, 2. So let's put a point there. Now this time our slope is negative 4. So remember what we know about slope. If the slope is positive, it's going to increase from left to right. If it's negative, it's going to decrease from left to right. So that's what's going to happen here. Instead of going up 4 units, we're going to go down 4 units. Now that negative, I've had students ask me, well, wait a minute, is it -4 over -3? No, I tell students a negative is like a stick in the water. If you put a stick in the water and let go, eventually it's going to float up to the top. So that's what's going to happen here. So that top number is our negative number. The bottom number is going to always be positive. We're always going to go to the right unless we're trying to go backwards. All right. So for this one, we're going to go down 4 units and then to the right 3. Again, I could do it one more time. It's down 4 to the right 3. If I want to go backwards, now I'm going to do the complete opposite. Instead of going down 4 and to the right 3, I'm going to go up 4 and then to the left 3. Oops. And then we get our line. All right. Now let's talk about, so let's just review horizontal lines for a minute. We've talked in your homework assignment, you've done a little bit with horizontal lines. But remember, we could have horizontal lines. Horizontal lines are going to be flat lines. And when we have a horizontal line, it's going to always have a y-intercept. Okay, in this case, the y-intercept there is at 3. I'm sorry, at 5. Sorry, where am I getting my numbers from? It's at 5. So our y-intercept is going to be at 5. And the slope. Let's think about the slope on this one. Now, I had a teacher once tell me that slope, you can think of slope as walking along a line. Okay, there's going to be times where you can walk on that line. It's going to be steep, and the other times it's going to be less steep. In this case, it's perfectly horizontal, so it's perfectly flat. So you could have someone walk across that line, which makes sense. They could keep walking forever. So there is a slope here, but we say it's a slope of 0. Okay, it's not increasing, it's not decreasing, it's just staying flat. So the slope is 0. Okay, so when we write our equation in slope-intercept form, we're going to have y equals 0x plus our y-intercept of 5. So we'd have 0x plus 5. Now, we could write it like this if we want to, but technically, it's proper to just lose the x because we have 0 x's. So it's proper just to leave it off and say it's y equals 5 would be our equation. Let's get another example. What would this one be? So we look at where our y-intercept is. So in this case, our y-intercept's at -2. And so our equation would just be y equals -2. So if you notice, when you're dealing with a horizontal line, it's always going to be y equals whatever the y-intercept is. So if the y-intercept is at 5, it's going to be y equals 5. It's at y equals -2, it's going to be at y equals -2. Well, what about vertical lines? So vertical lines go straight up and down like this one. Now, a vertical line, does it have a y-intercept? It's not 3. That's the x-axis. That would be an x-intercept. This one does not cross the y-axis. It's parallel to the y-axis. So there is no y-intercept. Does it have a slope? You might think, well, maybe the slope is 0. But 0 is a horizontal line this way. Is it possible for us to walk on this line? Now you might say, well, it's possible to climb it. That's not what I'm asking. Is it possible to walk on this line? So let's imagine someone standing up at the top there, and they're going to try to walk across it. What's going to happen? Yeah, they're going to fall to their death, okay? So there is no slope because you can't walk on this line. And so the technical word that we use for that in the math world is we call it undefined, meaning that there is no slope. So what does that mean? Can we have an equation? Yeah, we can have an equation. It's just not going to be in slope-intercept form. It's not going to be y equals mx plus b. Instead, we look at the x-intercept. So the x-intercept here is at 3. So that, remember, we had a horizontal line. A horizontal line, we just had the equation y equals 5 or y equals -2 based on where it crossed the y-axis at. So this is a vertical line, and it's going to hit the x-axis where x is 3. So the equation for this one is going to be x equals 3. So what would be the equation for this one? Where does it cross the x-axis at? Yeah, it crosses the x-axis at -4, so it's just going to be x equals -4. So that's the difference between a horizontal line and a vertical line. So a horizontal line, now this is where it gets confusing because I know the x-axis goes horizontally, the y-axis goes vertically. But as far as with the lines are concerned, a horizontal line hits the y-axis, and if it hits the y-axis at 3, it's y equals 3. A vertical line hits the x-axis, so it's going to be x equals where it hits the x-axis at. So if it hits the x-axis at 9, it's going to be at x equals 9. So that's how you can try to keep those straight. Where does it hit the x-axis and where does it hit the y-axis? All right. So just remember, horizontal lines, just as a review, horizontal lines always have a slope of 0. And they're always in the form y equals something. Okay, so in your notes, write down horizontal lines, slope equals 0, y equals blank. And just if it's crosses a y-axis at 4, it'd be y equals 4. Then vertical lines. So again, write this in your notes. Vertical lines have a slope that's undefined. If you want to put in parentheses no slope, that's what that means. Undefined means no slope. But I want you to be familiar with that vocabulary word. And vertical lines are in the form x equals wherever it hits the x-axis at. So it'll be x equals blank, x equals some number. So get that all in your notes. So with this last example, I want you to graph the equation y equals 3x plus 1. So that's what we did at the beginning of the video. If you need to pause the video and go back to some of those earlier examples, you can. Or look, if you took good notes, just look back at your notes to see what we did. So I want you to first graph y equals 3x plus 1. And then I want you to give me the equations for line A and the equation for line B. So pause the video and hit play when you're ready to check to see if you did it correctly. All right, how did you do? Let's find out. So y equals 3x plus 1. Where should that cross the y-axis at? Where is your starting point? Your starting point would be where y is 1. And then you should have a slope. The slope is 3, so we're going to go up 3 to the right 1, up 3 to the right 1. Or if we're going to go backwards, down 3 to the left 1, down 3 to the left 1. Get a bunch of points. You didn't have to do as many points as I did, but your graph should look exactly like mine. All right, hopefully you did that one well. Let's look at graph A. So graph A, remember, is a horizontal line, and it crosses the y-axis. Where did it cross the y-axis at? Cross it at 3, so you should have y equals 3 for your horizontal line. For your vertical line, where does that cross the x-axis at? You're right, it crossed it at 4, so it's going to be x equals 4. I hope you got those all right. So, I hope you feel more confident now with graphing in slope-intercept form, and even how to read a graph of a horizontal and vertical line. So now good luck as you work on this week's assignments.